while it is above water. Just yesterday, the Secretary of the Air Force, the Secretary of the Army, the Chiefs of Staff of both the Army and the Air Force testified to the House Armed Services Committee that in real time, climate change is impacting the strategic decisions that our military makes regarding weapons testing, basing decisions, the global movement of humans, and high-stakes territorial claims made by our adversaries in the Arctic. Our military does not have the luxury of an academic debate about climate change. They must respond to the reality that we face today, and so should the United States Congress. History will judge harshly my Republican colleagues who deny the science of climate change. Similarly, those Democrats who would use climate change as a basis to regulate out of existence the American experience will face the harsh reality that their ideas will fail. Today, along with other members of Congress, I'll be filing a Green Real Deal, a common-sense rebuttal to the Green New Deal. The Green Real Deal rejects regulation as the driving force of reform and instead unlocks the unlimited potential of American innovation and ingenuity. The question for America is pretty simple. Either we want a bunch of bureaucrats in Washington telling us what we can't do, or we empower American innovators to unlock things that we can do. Do we really believe that if we outlaw cars, cows, planes, and buildings, that the rest of the world will follow? Of course they won't. They will laugh at us. If we outlawed carbon emissions, do we really think that carbon-creating jobs wouldn't just move overseas as they have already done for decades? Is there a single piece of evidence that emerging economies will put off their own economic development for a generation to accommodate an environmental concern, no matter how legitimate? And if we do not reduce global carbon emissions, if we merely export pollution in service of our own virtue signaling, then we will have not done anything real to protect our beautiful planet. Being the world's fool or patsy won't combat climate change. Unilaterally disarming the American economy through crushing regulations will empower Washington, but few others. Our rise in global leadership on climate must be fueled by American innovators, and I have a plan to support them. The Green Real Deal establishes 4 platforms for American innovators to utilize, exploit, and deploy for their success. The first is an international marketplace that is fair to American innovators. Our current global trade and intellectual property policies fail to protect American innovation. Just look at solar. When photovoltaic cells were initially developed, America led the world in solar. And right now, our market share is collapsing because China robbed American technology, replicated that technology inexpensively, and then replaced American companies in the marketplace. China is now doing the very same thing with electric cars and electric vehicles. And so by having better policies with a platform of trade and intellectual property, it's a great platform for innovation. The second platform that the Green Real Deal establishes is a modernized electric grid for our country. The American Society of Civil Engineers rates the American electrical grid a D+. This functions as a wet blanket over American innovation because there is no mechanism by which we can have renewable technology used given the vast fluctuations in capability and production and utilization of renewables. But if we get this right, if we make the right investments in our grid, then we will create an entire class of energy entrepreneurs all over the country where people can put up solar cells, access hydropower, and then move that power back onto the grid so that renewable, cleaner energy can be democratized over wider swaths of the country. The third critical platform to unlock federal lands. Innovators should see our federal lands as an open canvas for renewable energy research, development, test, and evaluation. Instead, a complex series of regulations and special interest-driven contracting processes limit the ability of our beautiful spaces and our environment to contribute to their continued preservation. The fourth platform is an inclusive technology doctrine that would underlie an American innovation strategy. Right now, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission won't approve scalable modular nuclear reactors. Our agricultural and tax policies don't even contemplate the best carbon capture technologies in the world. And hydropower, some of the cleanest, cheapest power that you can access in our country, is too often blocked by needless government regulation. The Green Real Deal doesn't tell Americans what they can and cannot do. It doesn't use the apparatus of government to pick winners and losers in a distortion of the private market. The Green Real Deal is a love letter to the American innovator, and it is a real, serious plan to address climate change. I'm ready for your questions.
How can you say you want to fight climate change and eliminate the EPA at the same time?
Well, I don't think the EPA has done a good enough job addressing climate change, or really a great deal of other matters. I think the EPA is an $8 billion bloated entity, and if we embrace some of these market-driven reforms, we could deploy those resources where there'd be better utilization and ultimately a cleaner environment.
Do you have any Republican co-sponsors?
Well, a lot of the ideas that are referenced have been sponsored by Senator Barrasso of Wyoming, but right now we're working on the House.
How many House co-sponsors do you have?
Still adding. Ambassador Rooney is joining me in filing today, and we expect to be adding others.
Do you have any targets for emissions reductions or a temperature target, and by what date?
Yeah, I don't think that linear carbon emissions reductions are the path to success. I think that ultimately we unlock innovation exponentially if we create these platforms for innovation. If you merely create carbon emissions reductions goals and you don't have a strategy to achieve them, it becomes illusory, as we've seen in a lot of the carbon emission reduction literature that's been out for quite some time.
AOC has slammed your plan as lame and I think other words. How would you respond to that?
Well, look, there are elements of commonality in the Green New Deal and the Green Real Deal. We both agree that we've got to improve America's electric grid. I think that AOC and I agree that America's trade policies should not sell out the American innovator for global multinational corporations. And I think we also both agree that there shouldn't be a bunch of special interest BS that drives the decision making on the utilization of our federal lands. We want to get to the same place. Democratized access to cleaner energy. She wants to get there through a regulatory model. I want to get there through an innovative model. But frankly, we ought to be taking a lot more votes and having a lot more debate on all of it instead of spending days like we spent yesterday renaming post offices. Yes. Look, I'm known in this town as a guy willing to take up a lot of different arguments and go make them, but I didn't come to Congress to argue with a thermometer. And I think that more of my colleagues need to realize that the science of global warming is irrefutable, and when we have our own military telling us that they're having to alter their strategic decision making and their weapons testing as a consequence of climate change, it just no longer remains tenable to suggest that this is not happening. I don't think the oil industry is wild about it, but we're still waiting for other feedback.
Yeah. Your perceived closeness with the president, he's someone who's obviously trying to challenge the consensus around climate and national security. How can you be persuasive with him? Is that something you'll try to do?
Yeah. In conversations with the president, he's been very bullish about the potential of American solar. Also, the president has taken the strongest action in support of the American innovator during the time he's been in office, because he placed $50 billion in tariffs on Chinese tech that was punishing the American innovator. And so I think that the president has already embraced some of the underlying policies of the Green Real Deal, and I'll do all I can to get his support on the remaining elements.
Pretty much mocking the Green New Deal, though. I mean, does that risk, you're trying
Look at my sign, so am I.
If your plan were enacted, how would you know if it's used making any accomplishments without timelines or temperatures? goals.
Yeah, well, we can always measure progress by the capabilities that we enhance. So if we invest in the grid and a wider array of nuclear energy is able to occupy that grid, we can measure in that way. Matter of fact, the National Renewable Energy Lab says that if we make these important grid modernizations, that renewable energy today could accommodate 35% of the overall energy portfolio in our country. And so I think that those would be more important metrics than merely looking at U.S. carbon emissions, because the underlying premise of my argument is that we cannot regulate our way out of this problem, because emerging economies are not going to put off their own prosperity for an environmental concern. And so the pollution will merely be exported, it won't be reduced. And so that the better metric looks at our utilization of renewables and then adoption of those worldwide. I mean, this is not a problem that one party can solve. It's not a problem that one nation can solve.
How does your plan stand? How does your plan sort of stand to have a better chance of passage than the Green New Deal, given the Green New Deal has 92 backers and you're saying you have Rooney as one?
Well, I'm going to vote for it, and that's more we can say for the Green New Deal over in the Senate. You know, I mean, the Green New Deal can't get its own sponsors to vote for it. So I'll stand and back these ideas as a smart approach. And in my experience, if you lay out a good argument and it's consistent with people's values and principles, you can attract more support down the road. Yes, ma'am. We have to look through the windshield, not just into the rearview mirror. I don't know that we can recapture all of the market share in solar that we've lost, but we certainly can stop that leakage in market share from occurring in next generation technologies like electric cars. China right now is trying to steal electric automobile technology so that they can run the same plays that they ran against our solar industry, and they'll continue that strategy as long as it's effective. I think the president's recent executive order stopping some of the initial Chinese angel investment, limiting tech transfers on the opening of Chinese markets begins to protect the American innovator, but we need to do a lot more in the enforcement of intellectual property and also punishing those who violate our laws through action by the Congress.
Are you looking for Democratic support?
Yeah, I'll look for support anywhere. I'll take it. I was pitching these ideas to Ms. Ocasio-Cortez just a few minutes ago. There are some that I think we agree on, some we don't, but right now, we have a Congress that won't even have a serious debate about the way to address climate change because we've got either focus on frivolous other attacks on the president, or we've got too many Republicans who deny the science of climate change. Yeah.
Lots of Republicans that care about climate change potentially focus on carbon taxes as a way to combat it, including Rooney. So where does that fall?
Yeah, the carbon tax is not a part of the Green Real Deal. My fear with a carbon tax is that it would merely export carbon producing jobs. It would not reduce global emissions. There's no evidence that a carbon tax will be copied by the world. There's a lot of evidence that American innovation gets copied, not as much evidence that America's regulations get copied.
On innovation, are you advocating for more federal R&D spending? And if so, is there appetite for that in your caucus?
I think there is. Traditionally, Republicans have voted for additional R&D. I believe the government does have a role in that process, but the low-hanging fruit is the private capital that right now is on the sidelines as a result of our regulatory climate. We could be doing so much more on hydropower right now if we preempted some of the state and local regulations that limit hydropower. We could do a lot more in wind for the same reasons, but I think that the initial action should be incorporating a lot of the private sector investment that we can in the research and development.
What do you think if one other Republican has agreed to co-sponsor this?
You should ask them. You should ask every Republican whether or not they believe in the science of climate change. If they don't, you should ask them why they think that the Chief of Staff of the Army and the Air Force and the Secretary of the Army and Air Force are wrong. And if Republicans do acknowledge that the climate's changing, then it's incumbent upon each and every one of them to support a solution, not to merely acknowledge the problem and stay with their head stuck in the sand.
Do you think they're not taking it seriously?
You have to ask them. I take it seriously. That's why I'm here with a plan.
The president said the other night that suggested that the sound of wind turbines causes cancer. That was among, a variety of remarks like that he's made in the past couple of weeks. Have you had any discussions with him about this? Do you have any
Yes, I have heard in public and in private the president's critique of wind, but I have also heard the president express a great deal of support for the potential of solar and other clean technologies. Great. Thank you all so much for coming. Appreciate you. Oh, sure. One more.
Senator Gaetz was appointed to lead the president's healthcare push. I just wanted to get your comment on that, given his history with Medicare.
Well, Senator Scott did a lot to reform health care in the state of Florida, and we reduced cost as a consequence. So I think that he'll be able to give the president great advice. Thank you all.
Just a quick follow-up, do you mind?
No, I'm done. Okay. Thanks.
I'm done.
These are his. Oh, thank you. This is the second compliment I've gotten on these.